Welcome to our Playwell podcast. My name is Sherry Morgan and I'm the Director of Projects at Play Scotland, the national organisation for play. Today our Chief Executive Officer, Marguerite Hunter Blair, speaks to Dr William Bird MBE. William is passionate about getting people active. As a family GP in the 1990s, he pioneered the concept of social prescribing by setting up the first health walk scheme, closely followed by the first green gym. He quickly found that companionship and contact with nature were major driving forces in keeping people active. I hope you enjoy their conversation.
Welcome to Play Scotland's Playwell podcast. Today I'm absolutely delighted to be speaking to Dr William Bird MBE, who is passionate about getting people active. And I do know a wee bit about one of the projects that you have been involved in, William, called Beat the Street, because I was recently in a winning village in this wonderful project that you have. So would you like to tell us about intelligent health and where Beat the Street came from?
Of course, and what a pleasure it is to be with you today. Yeah, so I'm a doctor, I'm a GP, and really it all started back in the 1990s when I was trying to get my patients with diabetes more active, and they didn't want to be more active. And I asked them what it was, and they said, we didn't want to get lost, and the women were a bit worried about being outdoors on their own, etc. So that's why I set up health walks and green gyms and realised very quickly that the outdoors and being with other people and being out in nature was a massive boost on physical activity, but also on its own merit, health as well. And kind of fast forward a few years after working with Natural England and working in sport and Department of Health, although I'm still a GP, I set up Intelligent Health because I felt we could really make a big impact on a town or a city by getting people more active using games. And gamification was kind of coming in then back in the sort of 2010, 2011. And Beat the Street kind of evolved initially from a children's game for schools to try and pitch one school against another to do a competition. We realised that the mums and dads wanted to be part of it as well, and then the aunts and uncles, and then the community groups, and then the workplaces, and it became a much more community event. And then the same principles I'd learned all the way back from the 1990s about being outdoors, being in nature, being alongside other people, connecting to the place, connecting to the community, they're all the absolute assets that we drive forward. And although we're using a game to do it, it's kind of serious outcomes that we're really trying to deliver at the end of it.
I believe there's been about 2 million children at least involved in the game so far. Is that, do you have measurements that you hold on to at the moment? We
do. Every single player will fill in a questionnaire, and they'll fill in also about their own health and about what they think about the place they live in, which is so important. So it's actually 1 million children, 1 million adults we've had. So it is 2 million. And we've reached 6,000 schools have taken part. And wherever we go to a place, we tend to get almost every school on board. So it's been a huge learning curve, as you can imagine, from all that data from different people. And we know where they've gone to as well, which parks they've used, which canals they've walked along, which leisure centres they've gone to. It is changing a whole town into a game that makes it so exciting, because when you see so many thousands of people, we'll reach, in fact, it was in Stranraer that we actually got 34% of the population. So more than 1 in 3 of every man, woman and child took part. In Dumfries, it was 25%. And in fact, in Rutherglen, I think it was recently 25%. So we get a huge number. When you see all those people outdoors, it gives permission and confidence for people to go out and for people to realise that actually they live in a lovely place, but we don't often go out and see that place or explore it. And that's really what Beat the Street does.
And possibly what you're not capturing is the ripple effect, because I do know people who got out their houses to ask the children and the mums and dads what was going on, what were they doing, and walked alongside them when they were going to register. We haven't described it yet, how it's actually done, but there was no one in the community, even if they weren't taking part, that didn't know what was going on and was following how well everyone was doing. And I know that dog walkers in particular were befriended very quickly by children. If they weren't allowed to go out on their own, could they go with the dog walker down the road, that woman with whatever lab she's got? Can I go with her? So do you want to explain how it's done then as a game?
Yeah, so it kind of started phone apps, thank goodness.
Yeah.
So we actually managed to start to get, in fact, it started with little wooden boxes with Nokia phones. Do you remember the old kind of,
Yes.
the old phones?
Quite heavy phones.
Yeah, they were the kind of, heavyweight ones that you couldn't actually destroy at all. But we put those in boxes and we put the cards there around it. And then obviously we got a bit more technical and used RFID. But the key thing is that everyone has a card, a smart card, the kind of card you use to open doors in hotels, etc. And we give those to children, every single child in the school, and then they take it back home and they've got some in a pack for their parents. And then there's community places where it'll be either the shops or the library will actually distribute more. So you get these distribution centres. And once someone's got a card, they will register it, or they don't need to. They can just play anonymously if they want to. But there'll be these boxes, these grey boxes put all around the village or town or city, and those boxes will be put on lampposts, and we have to get permission for every single one of health and safety. You can imagine all the bureaucracy of having put a little box on a lamppost for the council. So we put them all around, and then people, all they have to do is walk from one lamppost to another with a beatbox, and then they get 10 points for their team. And people create teams. Usually, if it's a school, that would be the school team, but they're community groups that come together, they're workplaces that come together. So normally it's about 50% schools, 50% community groups. And the whole idea is that the more you walk, the more points you get. But we can be quite crafty, but we can increase the number of points per box. So if it's the Go Wild week, where we're encouraging people to connect to nature, all the boxes that are in parks will have double or triple points. If it's commuting week, then it will be all the ones between 8 and 9 in the morning, and between 4 and 6 in the evening will be double points. So you're trying to get people to walk to school or walk to work. So we can alter that. And of course, if you've got community groups that want to advertise what they're doing, so whether it's conservation work or maybe tennis club or maybe local art group, then they can have a mobile box where they are, and then we can put double points for them for their event, so that people will be drawn into their event and get the points. So I remember in Reading, we did it, and it was half term, and the museum really struggled to get children. It was a lovely display, but clearly families were not excited about going to the Reading Museum for half term. But we put a box at the back of the museum and told everyone it was triple points. And the museum just got inundated with families who'd never been to the museum before and have now continued to come back to it because they just realised that there was this amazing thing on their doorstep which they didn't know existed. So that's how it works in connecting people to the place. So we can put it along towpaths and canals, we can put it into the parks, we can put it into places where you're trying to get more people cycling or walking, into leisure centres, even to shopping centres where it may be a very small shopping centre of local shops, of local businesses, to take people away from the big supermarkets, to draw them there. And it's all done with the community. So the community decide where the boxes go. The council will work with us to try and work out where do we want people to explore their area, and then which community groups want to have that profile raised so that they can draw in more people to help with the volunteering or for work. So it goes back to that original thing of connecting people to their community and connecting people to their place.
Which is fantastic and so much aligns with what Play Scotland does in the placemaking that we're involved in and local community work. Does it take a big infrastructure to do this behind the scenes then? Because it does sound incredibly well organised and well thought out and a lot of local knowledge required. Or is it just that you get in touch with the local authority and they put it all in place?
So it's, if you looked at our team, you think, oh my goodness, how can a small team like that deliver something for 50,000 people? And some of this, our largest one was 60,000 people in Sheffield, all in one go. On day one, we had 60,000 playing. And there's a little team that do it, but we've done it 200 times, so they know what they're doing. Absolutely, the key is connection to the community and the council at the beginning. We don't want to kind of sweep in and pretend we know the place. We don't know the place at all, but the community do, the schools do, the people there, the steering group that's set up with the council. They all know what they want from Beat Street. So Beat Street is a tool. So it doesn't compete with anything. So let's say you had walking groups or you had park run, etc., we will enhance that park run. We will enhance those walking groups by drawing more people. So it's a tool that draws people into a new world, which is actually the world that's always been there, but they just didn't know it existed. And we have to, but ideally is at least 3 months of preparation so that we can talk to the council, the community groups, the officers there, and they can work out what it is going to be and how it's going to look. And that's really how it builds. And then every single day is choreographed so that we get the maximum amount of it. So that, for example, the Canal and River Trust and Scottish Canals, they would say, well, we want people to come along this canal and we're going to put an event on. So we want them to be drawn onto that day at that place and say, okay, we'll put something together. And when you've got 20, 30% of the population engaged, you can draw in all of those. So it is done very much for the community. And the other thing is that's different is almost all games try to retain people as much as possible. There's called the Octalis, I think it's called, which is the 8 ways that you can almost make the game addictive for people. And that's how Candy Crush and other games work so well, because they use this principles to draw people. We almost want to do the opposite. We want to make it attractive enough to get big numbers on board, but we want them to get tired of the game very quickly because we want them to continue on after the game is finished. And that's absolutely the key thing. So the more that we can get people on board, the best, but the more that the game becomes less and less important, and the trip to the park, the trip with their parents, going out there, talking to each other, the play, which they are now doing, suddenly that becomes the most important part. So when the game is gone, the catalyst is over, sustainability continues. And we do know it continues. We follow it up for 2 years, and we know that actually there's a very small drop-off rate of people being more active or going to the parks or doing other things because it's all there. It was there anyway. They just needed to be introduced to it.
But I think also what's so lovely is that people then spoke to each other in the community because they had a common goal to get these points. And so people that pass, maybe the dog walker and the woman next door, or the old man who goes for a wee wander at night, they spoke to these people then, because they were asking them, how many points have you got now? So it was a real stimulus in the community to allow for community engagement. And I think that will never go away, because once you've spoken to somebody once, you'll always speak to them or say hello to them on the way past. But sometimes you just need a reason to connect, and that definitely seems to have happened, certainly in the area that we're in.
One of my big passions is intergenerational connections, because I think we have kind of segmented, children do this, the adults do that, older people do that, and none of them meet again, but actually when you look back about the last 50 to 100 years and way beyond before that, everything was always intergenerational. You always had the children and the grandparents and the great-grandparents all doing the similar thing. And I think that intergenerational is exactly as you just say. I think it's a really powerful, it's very hard to measure. It's very hard to know how it's done good. But when you see a child out there talking to an older person because he's asking about who you're collecting your points for at a beat box, there's something that's positive that's happened.
It is.
And that's why we don't like using in the app. So we have got an app, and it costs a lot of money to develop an app, but we put that there. But actually, we don't like people to use it because they're looking at their phone, they get distracted. The children don't then talk to their parents. The map is not so different. We have a paper map, but the map on the phone is not quite the same. So although we have an app and some people do like to use the app, actually we prefer them to use the paper map, the cards and the boxes, because that's where people talk to each other. They look up, their eyes are up, they're looking around at the places they live, as opposed to looking down the phone, which we do far more than we should, and so do children. So getting them off the phone is even better.
It's absolutely fantastic. What if someone's listening to this and they would like their local authority or school to get involved? How do people get involved?
So it's normally through the local council. So we do get sometimes companies or sponsors, but most of the time it's the council. And you do need the council. It's really important to have the council. I kind of call it the invisible hand, because even if we get all the funding and we get all the community groups, and we don't really get the council buy-in, it never works as well. The council is absolutely key, even if they don't do a huge, big visibility. If you're interested, I would say it was info@intelligenthealth.co.uk. will be the email to go to. And it would normally be someone from the council, either public health or from the transport. And often in Scotland, it's been transport mostly, because obviously we're encouraging people to walk and cycle. And then just have a chat to see what could we do to help you as the council achieve the targets, or what you're trying to do out of the town you've got, of what you're trying to achieve. But the fallout, as you say, the ripple effect from, if it's a transport funding, the ripple effect on health and well-being, of community resilience, of the connection to places, the biodiversity, the tree planting, all those other things that will carry on. And play. And play is my big passion for children, because I think we're losing generations of children every day by them not being outdoors and connecting with others in play. But that can all come on the back of the fact that, okay, yes, we have got more people walking and cycling. That's where the funding has come from. But that knock-on effect of everywhere else is really, really important. And there is an official thing called ripple mapping. I don't know if you've heard of ripple mapping, where you can actually measure it. And there's an academic way of doing it, where you can actually go to after the event, you go to a room and you just fill it with all the community groups and people who had anything to do with that area, that place. And then you ask them, why are you doing this? And they say, well, it's because he talked to me. And so you go to Heave and you find out, well, what mentioned to you? And then you can find out that ripple effect from the game, what impact it had way further downstream that worked. So yes, please, we'd be absolutely delighted to go anywhere, anywhere at all.
And I suppose that's what I was going to ask you then, was you're measuring the impact. What do you see as the next level of what you're doing with this? Do you have a strategic plan that you're working to now as to what you're going to do next with all this information that you now have?
It started with physical activity, and that it still does. And it's still about 8 to 12% of increase of physical activity, people who weren't active who become active. We also realized that there were things like well-being that increased quite significantly. We measured that with the 4 questions, which are government questions. But what we have been working on are 2 other surveys, which we're really finding fascinating. One is the asset-based community development, which is you look at the assets of a community and understand what people are wanting to do to help their community. And you'll see big hotspots where it's working really well, and kind of negative spots where it's not working well. And then the other thing that you can see is that there's something called health creation. So that is measuring trust. It's measuring whether you like the place you live in, whether it's a good place to bring up children, whether you want to stay there, whether you've got values shared with others, whether you feel optimistic. So it's a whole suite of 10 questions which talks about generally the building blocks of resilience. And we measure that. And I think what we're finding is that, first of all, there's loads of assets in the communities where almost they're written off because they're so deprived, and they have lots of diseases, and people are not working, and there's poor mental health. But when we go into a place like that and we get very high uptake, we're finding that there are some fantastic assets. They actually love their community. They want to give, they want to help, they want to be volunteering. They actually don't feel too pessimistic. They feel quite optimistic. They just hate the place they live in. They just hate the environment because they don't feel safe. They don't feel it's a nice place to bring up children. And I think when we measure that, and we can measure it down to street level, you're kind of into the world of health creation as opposed to just prevention. So prevention is preventing diabetes or heart disease or early death. It's a very negative way of looking at life, because it's anti this or anti that. Whereas health creation is about the positivity of life. It's something which we strive to go and have a fulfilled life. And that's what we're measuring. And we're finding extraordinary correlations about how a lot of the communities who have got lots of problems actually have lots of solutions within them and assets which they can sort themselves. And I think that's what our next phase is, to how we can actually really turn that into actions that will help those communities thrive and prosper. That's
fantastic. And it reminds me so much of the Chief Medical Officer that we had in Scotland called Professor Sir Harry Burns. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you know him, but he, back in 2008, was very much about place. Place had everything to do with life chances. And he was a fantastic supporter of play as well. And I think it was really the health budget that he was in charge of that gave the first funding to play in Scotland. Certainly our journey in Play Scotland has very much been about place, but out of his intervention came the place standard tools that are used around the world. And obviously in Glasgow, we had this thing where I think in 4 stops on the tube, the life expectancy of males drops down to late 50s, from late 70s. Yet the poverty in Glasgow might not be any worse than the poverty in Liverpool or Manchester or London. So really trying to dig down into what is it that impacts on young people growing up. And so place has been such a driver for us, and we've now got a new play vision statement and action plan in Scotland released this year, and one of the primary drivers is place alongside parents and practitioners. And it's just so important that people understand the value of place, and as you say, how place can be used to transform a community. You can't change where people live or where you grow up, but you can actually as a community improve it in its own way, or as you say, use it to best advantage. And I just think it's a fascinating aspect that was maybe overlooked for a long, long time, that your health is related to where you live, and the opportunities that you get in life are all tied into that. And that play is at the heart of place. You say place, PLAYCE is what I think it should be spelt like.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. And actually, Harry Burns, I did meet him several times. He's my hero, really, because he did actually encourage me to keep going on this journey. Back in, as you say, it was back in 2000. I think I met him in 2008 or 2000, around about that time. Yes. And he is also telling me about the inflammation and how the body changes when you're under chronic stress, which a lot of these people are. So yes, I've got a lot to owe to him. He's a great man.
Us too.
Yeah, well, I think he influenced so many people. And I think what we kind of following on from that, the one thing that comes out time and time again is that people living in those areas where they are really stressed and don't feel they like the place, there's a lack of trust and there's a lack of feeling of safety. And I think those are the two things. And actually they correlate, because the brain can't trust and feel unsafe at the same time. It does one or the other. Even just getting people out would be street. You see, the biggest change we see out of that health creation is trust. Trust goes up. And all that's happened is people have talked to each other on the street. That's all that's happened. And yet that's enough for people to start to actually feel they trust people a bit more. And I think, we talk about lack of trust in workplaces and lack of trust in councils and politicians and media and police and teachers and doctors, and lack of trust has gone down anywhere. I don't think some of the institutions haven't been helpful in themselves, but I think it's the perception of people are just scared or fearful more than they've ever been in the past. Lots of things going on in the world, but they don't feel valued. They don't feel they belong even. They don't feel safe. They don't feel they're being listened to or respected. And it's that lack of control that is creating, I think, a lot of these problems that we're starting to see.
You're very much echoing what I've heard interviewing other people on the podcasts. And I think the other thing I've learned from the podcast series so far is, by interviewing lots of different people, the power of one person. I mean, the power, for example, the change that you've made as an individual to bring about this change. Harry Burns, we have him in common, who inspired us. It's just amazing. And I know in Maybole, in my local town, it was a teacher in the primary school. It's a big school campus. It's got all the primary schools in it. It's got the high school, it's got the nursery. And it was one teacher who was really, really passionate. She lived in another town where it happened, and she really wanted it to happen in that area. And yes, it takes lots of infrastructure and teams and people to bring it about, but you still need one person. The passion of one person, the power of the individual is massive, and I think that's what, when I meet people like yourselves and others on the podcast, we can bring about change, but you do need the energy and the imagination of one person quite often to start it. Somebody needs to start, and then people are very happy, I think, to join in.
I agree. And I think it is, you always think someone else should be doing it because someone else is better qualified, or they've got the mandate to do it, or they've got the badge that says that they should be doing it, because actually it's up to all of us to do it. Because if you have a badge, it doesn't necessarily mean you're the right person to do it, or if you feel a mandate sometimes. And we're not very good at believing in ourselves or believing in our own feelings. And I think we just have to sometimes just be brave and just say, sod it, I'm going to do it. and I pay. And I don't know if you know Professor Marguerite. He's from Glasgow and was born in a very poor area of Glasgow, but became a surgeon and then became director of Oxfordshire Health Authority. But he then set up all the screening, and he said what he did was he said, look, in the NHS, there was no formal screening program at the time. Nobody didn't have cervical screening or breast screening at the time when he was director of public health. Nobody talked to him and nobody kind of believed. So he set up a headed notepaper saying the National Screening Centre and put a brass plaque on his door saying head of the National Screening Centre. There was no such thing as the National Screening Centre. And when he sent these letters to the ministers, they all started to say, oh, yes, we must do that. And he set up screening and he had to do it that way. But it was one man against the system and just had to do it. And he said, just, ask for forgiveness, not permission. And that's
And when you talked about how people are feeling powerless almost at the moment, and we hear that from so many professionals that are working with our children, young people, and you've talked about it at community level, and people need to fight against that powerlessness and just get going. And that's a fantastic example of setting it up and getting going and creating that reality and that everyone in can buy into, which sounds a fantastic example. So William, I believe that you know something about the Sheffield study that we all use when we're presenting to talk about how much children's lives have shrunk in terms of geographical distance over many generations.
Well, I do. And actually, it goes back to 2000 and I think it's about 2007. So I was working at Natural England and we were about to launch the Natural Health Service. And my chief exec at the time, Helen Phillips, said, right, William, you've got to have a big story that goes out in the public domain. The poor marketing person who I was working with at Natural England, we were kind of thinking, how are we going to get a story out to the whole of, in the media? How's the media going to want to talk about the Natural Health Service? And their headquarters is in Sheffield. And I was in the library there because I had to get some books. And I asked the girl who was in charge, serving in the library, I said, you don't know any families here who could perhaps talk about, how things have changed here? And she said, yeah, I've lived here all my life. And says my father and my grandfather and my great-grandfather. I said, you wouldn't ask them if they'd be happy to talk about what they used to do when they were 8 years old. She said, yeah, and that's how it did it. So we quickly put that pitch to the Daily Mail, and the Daily Mail picked it up and they did the story, they got the graphic done, and they did it all within 4 hours. I think it was about 4 hours, 4 or 5 hours, and it came out the next day. And
well, William, just in case there's anyone listening to this podcast who doesn't know about the Sheffield study, would you like to tell us what the findings are?
The findings were we looked at the 4 generations at 8 years old to find out what their range of free roaming was. In other words, without a parent there. And a great-grandfather back in 1921 or 1912, I think it was able to walk about 6 miles on his own with his mates all the way down to the Rother Valley down in Sheffield, and nobody caring at all, because the parents would say that if he fell over or something happened, someone would pick him up. There's always friends they know around. And then the father was the grandfather, then he was actually able to go for about a mile, but that was still to the woods fishing a long way from the house. And the mother was much less, and that was about that was just down to half a mile to the local swimming pool, but that was the only place she could go to on her bike and come back again. And that was in the late 70s. And then Ed, and don't forget this was 2006, aged of 8, was about 300 meters, but actually they wanted to have line of sight to where he was going and they weren't allowing it. And if we did that again, and Ed now, if you think he was 8 in 2007, whenever it is, he's probably got children anyway, that is probably now down to 0 because nobody's allowing their child out of sight completely. But what it showed is how dramatically in 4 generations the roaming had gone from 6 miles down to 300 meters, and the loss of activity, play, independence, resilience, and all the other connections to friends and family and to nature itself has all vanished because of this indoor culture that we've got. So it's really effective. And although it's been replicated, and I wanted it to be replicated in other places, it kind of has always stuck and it's always been out there. So I'm really pleased that it's being used.
It's so powerful. And I know that Ed was unusual, that he was allowed down to the end of the street in the line of vision, because I think at the time when the story was carried, they were saying that actually a lot of children in that street were only allowed out to the garden gate. And that was the size of a kitchen table. You know, it wasn't a big front garden. So actually their right to roam had shrunk to the size of a kitchen table. I mean, it was a very well done piece, incredibly done in such a short space of time, and has had such an impact on so many of us. And, you know, I know you're saying it was done way back then, but we do roll it out all the time because, as you say, yes, it's been replicated, but that is just so, you can actually see it. It's one of these visual pieces of research or a survey where you can actually imagine, because we all had grandparents who went and did things and told us stories, and great grandparents, and you'll see pictures of them in a river somewhere and you wonder, oh my goodness, how did they even get there? Well, of course they walked there. That's how they got there.
Well, it's funny, my son just showed me just day before yesterday, actually, he said, he showed me a tweet and someone had tweeted it. I can't remember who it was, but it had 1.2 million followers for that map. And
wow.
And my other son didn't even know I had anything to do with it.
Oh, for goodness.
You are joking, Dad. You were responsible for that, he said. And he said, oh, you've gone up in my estimation. So then I got a couple of brownie points from one of my other sons.
Well, I'm very pleased to meet the man behind the map. I really am. Super.
And Tim Gill's
really
done a
nice
great job in pushing it out as well. He's another hero of mine, Tim.
Tim Gill's brilliant. He really is, actually, yes. No, and he comes up with some great things, you know, even I'm thinking of, you know, children in Oxfordshire up trees being given, you know, orders for, you know, unsociable behaviour and things like that, getting these, can't remember what they're called, but, you know, orders for being antisocial. So he's very good at picking these up in the paper as well and putting them out to good effect to get the message across to the audience. He's very good. Well, listen, thank you so much, William, for being on our podcast series today. It's been absolutely delightful to talk to you.